Your magic compounding story is built on a lie, and it is costing you real money right now. They told you to be patient, save early, and compounding will make you rich. But in 2026, compounding does not rescue people who have no power, no cash flow, and no protection from losses. It only rewards the few who already have the capital and the control to survive volatility long enough for math to work. This is not financial advice, this is financial education. And if you have ever stared at your bank account after paying rent, after paying insurance, after paying for groceries that feel permanently expensive, and you still heard strangers preaching, just start now, then you already understand the cruelty. Compounding is real, the marketing is not. The part nobody wants to say out loud is that compounding needs something first, a base that can take damage. In this video, I am going to break down what compounding actually depends on, why most people misunderstand it, and why the people selling you the dream are often selling you a distraction. We will talk about the classic Einstein said compounding is the eighth wonder narrative, and why it gets repeated like a spell while the financial system quietly changes the rules under your feet. We will also connect this to what you are living through in 2026, AI shrinking middle-class jobs, the Federal Reserve holding rates high for longer than your savings can handle, housing detaching from wages, inflation stealing purchasing power even when headlines calm down, and wealth concentration accelerating at an almost obscene speed. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. Compounding is not a plan for wage earners. It is a survival tool for people who already won. So let's start with the story you were sold. The first lie is subtle, because it uses real math. The pitch sounds reasonable. Put money aside, let interest accumulate, reinvest the gains. Over decades, your wealth grows like a snowball. The longer you do it, the more unstoppable it becomes. The example is always clean. A person invests a small amount, then magically the gains pile up. Then the person becomes rich by age 60, like some cinematic character stepping out of a retirement brochure. But the version you never hear is the part that happens between year 1 and year 40. The version where life interrupts the plan, the version where your health costs spike, the version where you lose your job to automation, the version where rent jumps again while your salary stays flat, the version where your investments drop 20 or 30% and you are forced to sell because you need cash, not because you believe in the strategy. Compounding only works if you do not break the chain, and most people break the chain, not because they are irrational, because the world they are living in is designed to drain them. In 2026, that design is obvious if you stop pretending it is not. Picture a 32-year-old nurse named David. He works nights, he does overtime when he can, and he tries to follow the script. Every paycheck, he routes a portion into a retirement account. He reads posts about compounding, watches videos about the eighth wonder, and he tells himself he is doing the right thing. Then the next year arrives with a new kind of pain. His hospital cuts hours because staffing models get optimized. An AI tool schedules smarter, nurses get fewer shifts, and wages do not rise to compensate. Meanwhile, his rent rises anyway because housing demand does not care about your budget. Now imagine David logs into his brokerage account during a market drop. The value is down 10%, then 15%. He does not have an emergency fund big enough to float him, so he sells a portion to cover a bill. That one forced sale is the break in the chain. The compounding story never accounts for the moment you are dragged back to the present. This is the first cliffhanger in the real explanation. They sell you compounding as if the hardest part is waiting. The truth is, the hardest part is surviving the losses that force you to sell. And here is where the second lie shows up. They also teach you compounding as if the only lever you need is time. The pitch is always, the longer you wait, the bigger the result. But time is not the lever, time is the setting. The lever is capital that can withstand drawdowns. Without that, time just becomes a long runway toward failure. In 2026, you are seeing the evidence everywhere. And inflation may have cooled on paper, but purchasing power did not snap back. Federal Reserve interest rate decisions still ripple into your life through mortgage costs, credit card interest, auto loans, and the price of almost everything financed. When the Fed stays tight, the economy slows unevenly. Middle-class households feel it through bills, asset owners feel it through opportunity, so compounding becomes a one-sided game. The wealthy can buy the dips because they do not need to sell. The middle class sells because rent is due. You might be thinking, okay, so I need more discipline. Save more, stay invested, don't panic. That advice is not wrong, but it is incomplete in a way that feels like mockery, because discipline is not the main problem when your life has structural pressure. Here is what compounding really needs, and I want you to hear it clearly. It needs a stable base. It needs cash flow that keeps you alive while markets fluctuate. It needs a tolerance for temporary losses without turning them into permanent damage. It needs protection against the kind of loss events that wage earners cannot absorb. And that is exactly why the compounding sermon gets repeated nonstop. It is not just financial education, it is psychological management. If you believe compounding is the cure, you stop asking why the system is extracting from you faster than your savings can grow. Now let's talk about the most famous symbol in this story, Warren Buffett and the quote people love to repeat. They mention Albert Einstein, they mention Buffett, and then they translate that into a simple moral. Invest early, and you will become rich slowly. But here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Buffett did not get rich from a normal person-style compounding story. He built leverage through capital structure, business control, and insurance float. He also started with money and access that most people will never see. His story becomes misleading when it is turned into a generic buy-and-hold stock lecture for people who do not understand what they are buying. According to widely documented historical information, Buffett was already investing and had capital early. He also grew wealth through business acquisition and control. When he buys, he is not just collecting a small return like a bank account. He is acquiring companies, shaping cash flows, and building institutions that can survive downturns without forcing him into selling at the worst time. That is not the same game as the wage earner investing a few $1,000s into a diversified fund and then hoping nothing breaks for decades. The wealthy do not only compound returns, they compound control. And yes, Buffett has been associated with the idea that he avoided heavy borrowing when advising others. But he still benefited from the fact that insurance businesses collect premiums now and pay claims later, and that float can be deployed. In plain language, some capital arrives cheaply and predictably. You can reinvest it, you can scale with it, you can weather storms without selling your core. That is a mechanism compounding needs and most people never get. So when someone tells you compounding is the eighth wonder, they are skipping the mechanism and keeping only the slogan. In 2026, slogans matter because they keep you from asking questions that might anger you. Like why housing prices permanently detached from wages. Like why AI is eliminating entry-level middle-class roles faster than most people predicted. Like why the top 1% keeps accumulating more wealth while the rest of the country fights to maintain baseline living standards. You are not lazy. You are not stupid. You were just never given the real playbook. Here is a micro story that makes it visceral. A friend of mine once worked on a financial marketing team for a large wealth platform. Their job was not to manage money. Their job was to manage perception. They learned the same lesson every marketer learns. If you can convince someone the problem is personal willpower, you can keep them from noticing structural causes. So they pushed language like lifelong investing, compounding, consistency, and discipline. They gave people cute charts with smooth curves. Then they changed nothing about the environment that makes smooth curves impossible for most households. No policy to lower housing costs. No safety net that prevents forced selling. No wage growth that outpaces the combined pressure of inflation and high financing costs. That marketing was not a mistake. It was a strategy. And now, in 2026, the strategy is hitting new targets because AI is accelerating job displacement. If your job disappears because a model can do it better, what happens to your compounding plan? It freezes, it collapses. And the people who sold you patience act like it was your fault for not being patient enough. But patience is not the issue when your income stream is cut. The real issue is whether you have capital buffers and diversified cash flow sources. Compounding is what happens after you already have stability. Now we come to the third lie, the one that feels the darkest because it is wrapped in hope. They tell you compounding will work for everyone if you start small today. They present a fantasy where the math is the hero and your life is a neutral background. But the math does not happen in a neutral background. It happens inside markets that drop, inside credit systems that tighten, and inside housing markets that lock people into longer and longer debts. It happens while climate-driven disruption reshapes insurance pricing and raises costs in ways people did not plan for. It happens while global debt keeps stacking up, and governments and central banks keep making decisions that change the risk environment for ordinary households. In 2026, the disconnect is not subtle. The stock market can hit highs while real families drown. That disconnect is not accidental, it is partly mechanical. When rates are high but still low enough to support asset valuations, investors who already own assets benefit from liquidity and from the idea that future earnings will eventually justify current prices. Meanwhile, wage earners experience the cost side: rent, food, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and then social media pours gasoline on confusion. It shows you influencers talking about passive income, the creator economy, side hustles, and investing. Most of those creators make $0. The ones who do make money do it through sponsorships, ads, and promotions, not through the passive wealth fantasy they preach. But the content keeps you chasing the wrong thing. Because if you believe the solution is invest consistently and wait, you stop demanding an income plan that survives job disruption and inflation. You stop asking why employers can restructure work using AI while layoffs hit younger people first. You stop asking why rent and insurance do not behave like economic indicators. They behave like scarcity and negotiation power. So let's get practical about why compounding gets you in trouble. Compounding is not just about growth. It is about reinvestment of gains, yes. But it is also about reinvestment of losses when you are forced to sell. That is the hidden asymmetry. If you take a 10% gain in good times, and then you take a 15% loss in bad times, your trajectory depends on what you do next. But the wage earner is rarely allowed to do what the math requires. The wage earner often has to withdraw. They sell low because they need cash. That is not a theoretical concern. That is the typical real outcome when there is no buffer. So here is the brutal rule. Compounding rewards stability. Wage earners are not living in stability. And this is where I want you to stare at a question that most people avoid. Are you earning enough, and do you have enough reserves that a temporary market drop will not force you to sell? If the answer is no, your compounding plan is not a plan. It is a countdown. You might have heard people say volatility is normal. You might have been told to ignore headlines, but ignoring headlines does not ignore bills. Ignoring volatility does not ignore the mortgage payment. Ignoring drawdowns does not ignore the credit card balance. Ignoring market drops does not stop AI from rewriting job descriptions. So what should you do if you understand this? I am not going to pretend there is a single magic approach, but there is a clear principle that separates winners from victims of financial myths. The principle is this. Before compounding returns, you need compounding assets and compounding life stability. You need the ability to keep money invested without turning the market into a forced cash machine. And for most people in 2026, that means thinking like an owner, not like a saver. Ownership is not a mindset, it is a structure. Owners have income streams that do not disappear because their job title gets automated. Owners have balance sheets that can absorb shocks. Owners can wait out downturns without losing their housing. Now, I know some of you will hear be an owner and roll your eyes because everyone says it, but I am not talking about vague entrepreneurship advice. I mean cash flow mechanics. If your household depends on only one paycheck, your financial life is not compounding. It is hostage. Let me give you another micro story. A 36-year-old software consultant, not a developer, just a consultant, watched the AI wave roll through her industry. She had a decent income, but her projects got smaller. Her clients started using AI tools and reducing human hours. She tried to save more. She tried to cut expenses. She reduced spending. But when income declined, savings were not enough. Then a friend suggested a shift. Build a small asset-backed income stream, not a gambling trade. It might be a property with rent. It might be a small business with service contracts. It might be a structured arrangement where she did not rely entirely on one employer. She started building something that generated cash flow regardless of one company's hiring decisions. The point is not that every person can do this instantly. The point is that she moved from being a worker with savings to an owner with resilience. In her world, compounding stopped being a lecture and started being a background process. That is the difference. Now we need to tie this to the retirement crisis, because this is where the compounding myth turns mean. Many people were sold an idea that their retirement will be fine if they invest early, but in 2026, the retirement system is under stress. Social Security is facing long-term funding pressures. Underfunded pensions have been a recurring headline. Aging populations increase costs while tax bases struggle. When retirement ages get pushed back, you are not just delaying leisure, you are delaying your ability to recover from economic damage. You are extending the period where you can be forced into selling assets during downturns. You are extending your exposure to high interest rates for longer. And that is why compounding fantasies crash against reality. Your compounding plan assumes you will have time and stability. The retirement system assumes you will age without being disrupted. But disruption is the norm now. And don't forget housing. Housing is the invisible retirement killer. If you rent forever, you are feeding someone else's balance sheet, not building your own equity. In the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and many parts of the developed world, housing costs rose faster than wages for years, and then financing costs started behaving like a permanent tax. Even when inflation cools, the damage lingers because home prices and rents adjust with lag and then stick through political and financial incentives. So even if you invest, your ability to hold investments depends on your cost of living staying reasonable. It rarely stays reasonable. And now climate-driven disruption adds another layer. Insurance markets collapsing in certain regions, migration pressures, rebuilding costs, and public spending shifting away from what people hoped for. That means compounding is not just competing with markets, it is competing with survival expenses. Now let's talk about the people who sell you free from the bank's freedom. Crypto was pitched as decentralized liberation. In 2026, the reality is that institutional players own more of the ecosystem than retail investors do. Regulation changed behavior, market structure matured, custody and liquidity became institutional. Retail gets volatility and headlines. Institutions get balance sheet control. So when you hear compounding promises attached to crypto, you should treat them as the same kind of narrative risk as the stock marketing story. The math still works, but the question becomes who controls the downside and who is forced to sell. Crypto in 2026 is a story of institutional takeover, liquidity cycles, and regulated access. If you are retail and you do not have a reserve, compounding becomes a trap when your exchange access, your custody choices, or your ability to hold through a major drawdown breaks. You are again relying on stability you do not possess. So what is the darkest truth here? It is not that compounding is false. It is that compounding is not a universal equalizer. It is a reward function for people who